Right, are we rolling?
Yes.
Okay, so this week we're gonna try and set up our own Jellyfin media server. Now, the website is jellyfin.org. What is a media server, you're probably wondering? Well, it's just a thing that has all of your various media. This includes films, TV series, music, books, images, videos you might have, and makes them accessible off of your network. Or if you do some port forwarding, you can also access them from outside of your network, simply through a connection to the website you're hosting it. Now, Jellyfin itself is actually a free and open source fork of Emby. Emby is a media server that still exists, but currently Jellyfin, I believe, has better features than Emby, even though Emby went closed source and you have to actually pay for some of them. So I guess that's a good thing for open source software. So the website is jellyfin.org. On here, well, they give you a bit of a sales pitch about what they do. But what we're interested in is the downloads. So there's various ways you can run this. As always, there's Docker. There is they have repositories you can plug your stuff into if you're running Linux. So there's a Debian repository. It's under AUR, and there's various packages you can download. This also works on Mac OS and Windows because it's actually written in C#, so using Mono, it runs on almost every platform. And so the way I'm going to show you this time around, because when you install it through the package archive, it's literally just a single command. I'm instead going to show you how to set it up to Docker because it makes it a lot more self-contained. So I have prepared a Docker Compose file I can go through now. This is actually very simple. It uses the Linux server.io compose file. This, I believe, is a different one from the one that is officially offered by Jellyfin on the Docker Hub. But yeah, this is the official one. But the Linux server one has a few more options, which make it more akin to the Docker philosophy because you're able to configure stuff from the actual Docker launch command rather than configuring it in the Jellyfin interface. So if we go to the GitHub for that, you'll be able to see the various options that they provide. So first of all, it's available on multiple architectures, which means that when you specify the Linux server image, it will automatically pull the one for the architecture on. So whether you're on a desktop computer, whether you're on your Raspberry Pi or work. And here's some sample Docker Compose. This is where I took mine from. The important parts are obviously the image and these few environment variables here, the paths for where your media is stored, and this port right here, 8096. The rest is mostly optional and I'll go through it later. So this is all that is on mine is the port, which is a standard port for Jellyfin, and the volumes that actually contain the stuff. Now you might have noticed in this directory, I actually have created some folders, books, films, music, TV series. That's what I've called them. You can call them whatever. You store your stuff in there. And then you do a bind mount. So for example, I mount the films directory in the local to the /data/films in the container. Now the first folder can actually be anywhere in the system. For example, you could have mounted an external hard drive with all of your stuff on it. Then there you just put the path to that and it will work. And the container won't know any better. It won't know that it's an external thing. It would just know that it's in data films. Now, one important thing is this here, the PUD. These are important because otherwise Jellyfin won't be able to read your files if permissions are wrong. So what you want to do is whatever username you logged in as, type ID, the username, and it will tell you what your ID is. In my case, it's 1000. That's usually the case for the first user. Then it'll be 1001 and so on. That's because the folders in here are under my username. So if you don't set these two variables correctly, it could give you some issues. Okay, having gone through all of that, let's spin this up. And you'd also want to make sure that you, if you get loads of errors, that your Docker system daemon is running. If it's not, just spin it up. For example, with systemd, you do system console start and so on. So because that's on the local host port 8096, that's all you need to type in here, localhost 8096, to be able to get into it. This is the quick start. So first of all, we choose a reasonable language, not the defaults. Then we choose extremely secure username and password. This is for the admin account, which you can actually create multiple accounts. Here, let's us set up some media libraries. So there's various different content types it can serve. So let's go for movies, and then you can call this whatever you like. But importantly, you have to select a folder. Well, these are the ones we configured earlier. So data films contains all our films. Select that. Don't necessarily need to set up the rest of this, but it's useful for some plugins and add-ons that Jellyfin has to actually choose a country. It doesn't matter what you pick really for the example, but it's used for stuff such as subtitles and choosing which audio language you'd want. Right. Press OK. We can add the rest later if we like. Now, this is the remote access section. You can change all of these settings in the admin panel later anyway, by the way, but if you are, for example, hosting your thing on a Raspberry Pi, you actually do want a lot of remote connections because it counts as remote connection if you're accessing it within your network, even if it's not port forwarded. You probably never want to use the second option because that would just expose your server with no HTTPS to the entire internet. That's probably not a good idea. As in, you probably want to put a reverse proxy in front of it if you're doing that. So now finishing all of that setup, we can log into a super secure account, which is admin password. And here we see basically all of our media. Now currently I only put in a single film in there, as you can see. If we check in films, that's the only thing that was in there. It's an MP4 file. This is Big Book Bunny, which is a royalty-free film created by the Blender Foundation. It's under Creative Commons, which is why I've chosen it as an example. So if this were an actual known film, Jellyfin would actually fetch some metadata about it. So it would have told me, okay, this came out in this year and so on. And it would display here. But there isn't any, so we're gonna try and play it. So as you can see, this is playing right in the browser. And well, it's just an animation film, really, 10 minutes long. It's a short, to be precise. Well, we're not gonna watch the whole thing, but there's some options you might want to know from here. The quality is probably the only one that you care about. It's usually set to auto. It will try to guess based on your internet speed. This is essentially a cap on the quality. So if you have a 4K in here, but your current connection can't handle it, you would choose 1080 and it would go for that instead. The megabits per second is actually a measure of the actual quality regardless of the resolution. As I believe 60 is close to what Blu-ray discs have. And you probably won't have files like that unless you actually own a Blu-ray disc. So let's try adding some. Let's go into the admin panel, which is over here in the dashboard. Now, immediately here we can see, first of all, the active devices. This was me. And one of the things you might want to pay attention to is transcoding and direct play. This is because if you're actually running this on a Raspberry Pi, it usually can't handle transcoding, which is changing from one codec to a different one because the client device can't receive it because it just doesn't support. For example, if you have an H.265 file, that usually causes problems because it's only recently getting hardware acceleration support. And that's a whole other topic. But over here in the active devices, it will tell you whether the device is using direct play or transcoding. So you know if you get choppy playback, that might be the issue. So under users, we can add more users. And one of the useful features of this is that we can limit the access to certain libraries. So for example, I can choose to create 2 separate film libraries, one for the kids' films, and create accounts for the kids and only give them access to those and so on. On the libraries, I will be able to choose a different type of content. So let's go for music. And we can also add books and TV shows and photos. So the examples I have are for books and music, so we'll add those. If we go back to home, now if you actually have a lot of stuff in those folders, it could take a while for Jellyfin to scan through it, but once it's done that, it's in the database and you shouldn't need to worry about it. So there's here's some McLeod royalty-free music that we can listen to. Well, the web interface works like you'd expect it to. It's a web player, but it also supports most of the features of, say, Spotify Online, with playlists and so on. And if the song is known, you can set it to essentially fetch metadata for it, so any details and such. I believe it uses music brains for that. If we go into the metadata, yes, it can use music brains and the AudioDB. It does that automatically usually, not for this track because it's a royalty-free one, but you'll see it if you add something else. We can also view books on here. This is the importance of being earnest. I'm not sure why you'd want to read a book through a web interface, but you can. So here's the play Algernon and Jack and so on. So actually, that's most of the interface. There's some more options you might want to check out. For example, Jellyfin is actually able to download subtitles off of opensubtitles.org for you if you like. That's not over there. That's in the plugins, which are down here. So these are the default ones. And if we go to the catalog, Open Subtitles, that's the one. So you'd select to install this. it's telling us it would have to restart. You actually have different multiple options for restarting this. One of which should be to the UI. Never mind, I don't remember what it is. Let's do it to Docker. So if we issue a Docker compose down command, it will bring down the containers, stop them, everything. So if you were to try and load this up now, it shouldn't work exactly. If we do up -d, which is demonize, it will spin it back up. Actually, while we're here, you can actually do compose logs, which shows you the logs for what's going on, and -f basically attaches you to it. So you can see what it's actually doing without interfering with it. So this is just printing out the debug log essentially. And we should be able to load this back up now. Excellent. So here's the open subtitles. To use this, you actually have to put in a username and password that you would have registered on the website. But once you have that done on any film, you should be able to click on it and be able to download the subtitles. And that's not showing up because I haven't logged in here, but once you click that, it shows you with a menu of say 10 subtitles ranked by the vote people have given them out of 5 stars for that one film. This is very useful if you are looking for subtitles, because whatever kind of media you might have acquired on here might not come with it. Now we'll have a quick look now at transcoding, because it can be very useful. If you're on a Raspberry Pi, it has in the ARM chip a H.264 hardware accelerator. To use that, you would have to use these sort of instructions here. The opt-vc-lib and all of the devices here. It's advised that you just put them all in and then try to restart your container. If it spins back up, fine. You're probably grand, but once you've done that, you would go into the settings, back into the dashboard, playback. And in playback, you would choose OpenMax OMX, which is the one created specifically for a Raspberry Pi. But let's say you weren't running this on Raspberry Pi. There's other ways of doing that. You would really need to know that it's set up and it works for your system, so I can't advise you here. But on Linux, I would probably be either the VA API, NVIDIA NVNC, or the Intel QuickSync. And the rest obviously for other things. Now, once you've set that, you can set all sorts of options here. Usually this is used for converting H.265, which is computationally expensive, to H.264. So if your receiving device, your client, doesn't have how to accelerate H.265, when you're trying to view it, it could be extremely choppy and you basically unwatchable. That's what transcoding for. However, you're probably much better off just aiming at having files that are just H.264, because that gives the best compatibility. They do occupy a bit more space and take up more bandwidth to stream, but that's the trade-off. A very useful place to go is actually the Jellyfin docs. If you're having a problem, the solution is probably on here. So for example, we're talking about hardware acceleration. You just go on there and it tells you everything you need to know about it in full detail, like acceleration on Docker and so on. That's how you would set up a more advanced system. That's more or less everything you need to know about this because there isn't much to it. The only other thing I can, I guess, show you is the clients. For if you have this running on, so you have it outward facing off of your network, you give it an IP address and so on. They actually have a lot of clients that you can connect this with, including Kodi, all of the consoles. There's an Android app. There's multiple desktop clients. You can Google Cast it, AirPlay it. Yeah, there's also some which are specifically made for music, such as Jelly. And there's the MPV shim, which is essentially for desktop streaming through MPV, which is a music player. Media player. But it makes sure that it's using direct play wherever possible. So if you encounter an issue with transcoding when it shouldn't be, that's probably the client you want. Sometimes in the browser it won't work properly. An example I can give is Firefox doesn't support H.265 straight in the browser because that's actually proprietary codec and they don't want to pay the license, so they just haven't included it. But it would work in like Chrome, or you'll just download it from client. So I guess that's all that you need to know about Jellyfin. If anyone has any questions, go ahead.
Hey Kevin, how does it compare to Plex?
Yes, Plex. I believe Plex has more features. If you compare the Plex paid version to Jellyfin, but if you compare Jellyfin, which is completely free and open source, to the Plex free version, Jellyfin has more features.
I've noticed Plex tends to be much better at picking up metadata than Jellyfin. If you're lazy like me and couldn't be bothered to reorganize your ethically acquired media.
Usually the metadata though is responsibility of whatever way you're acquiring your extremely legally sourced
But
material.
I can just lop in my legally sourced media and Plex just figures it out. Whereas I've had problems with Jellyfin.
Well, Jellyfin does use these
It's just
metadata
it
downloaders.
fails a lot more frequently than Plex's, unfortunately.
That's fair. You can enable more in some of the categories. Yeah, for example, in the music, but you don't have to pay for Jellyfin except for you hosting it yourself. Also, Jellyfin is actually going to get a completely new UI at some point in the future. They're rewriting it in Vue. For the current one, it's basically the same one from when they forked off of MB. The base code, anyway. Actually, if anyone was interested, if you have extremely legally acquired TV series, there's a specific format you'd want to put them in the folders, which involves having a folder for the name of the TV series, such as Great Series, and inside that, folders for each season, like season 1, season 2, and then inside those, a file for each of the episodes. If you follow that, Jellyfin usually figures out exactly what's going on and can parse it correctly.
I'm far too lazy to that. Plex just does it magically.
Jellyfin is able to work it out if you don't do that, but it's a lot better for it if you do.
Okay. I must try it again because I switched back to Plex after it seemed to mess up a whole lot of my library.
Sad.
Big sad.
Ooh, metadata. Actually, while we're at it, Jellyfin does have sync play, which means that if you're logged into the same account onto different devices for the same Jellyfin instance, you can watch it synchronized. Or if you pause it on one, you can pick it off on the other at the same exact moment.
That's pretty cool.
It's very useful during a pandemic, actually. If you want to watch something, kind of a Netflix party, I guess.
How many streams, or like how many streams can you run at the same time on a Raspberry Pi?
Is this a Raspberry Pi 3 or 4 or what model?
4.
I would say Raspberry Pi 4 with like 2 gigabytes would be able to handle about 2 or 3 streams at once, and it goes up from there based on the RAM. Now these are streams without transcoding. Raspberry Pi really shouldn't be doing any transcoding. It cannot handle that really well. But in a way, there's the base amount of resources that it uses, and then from there, there's not that much more RAM that it would use for each stream. The issue is usually the bottleneck is actually the bandwidth, especially if you're running it over the internet. The upload speed will be the bottleneck.
Cool, thanks. What's your Jellyfin setup running on and looking like at the moment?
It's running on a Raspberry Pi 4 with 8 gigabytes of RAM, but that's because it's also running a lot of other stuff. Are you asking me to show you the actual thing?
No, I just meant the like for networking and stuff as well. Have you got it set up?
It runs behind a traffic reverse proxy.
I refuse to call traffic traffic.
Look, I had to look it up, and it
It
says on the page that it's
traffic, but
supposed to be.
it's just confusing.
Yeah, because it's just too generic at that point.
Yeah.
That's this thing for the uninitiated.
Yes.
Traffic.
Traffic. I call it. Yeah. It's nice.
I had tried using it Nginx reverse proxy, but it just didn't behave. It just wouldn't work well as I wanted it to, and this did. So
I might. Yeah, I might do an event on. Might be an idea to do an event on reverse proxying.
That's a good
There's
idea.
Caddy as well, which I have
Oh
only
yeah,
limited
Caddy.
experience with, but I think it's, from my impression of it, it's like Trafic Lite basically. It's probably a lot easier to configure, and it has
The
like,
traffic's already quite light, isn't it?
yeah, I mean it's
It's only a reverse proxy. Well, Nginx is actually a web server.
yes. Caddy can serve static files as well, but the config is a lot
Oh,
more
that's
lightweight.
fair.
I've dug fairly far into Trafic, and the configuration goes kind of wild in some places.
That's true. Yeah, traffic is actually configured. If you're using Docker, it'd be configured by applying labels to your.
Labels. Are you using Docker Swarm
Oh,
or
I guess if you're doing that, yeah, that's. But if you just have a like a Docker Compose, you would just add labels to the actual thing,
yes?
which is actually what make it very easy for me to spin up a new service because I already have the main traffic thing set up. I just copy the labels over and change the name.
Yeah, I'm still using on my home setup. I'm still using Nginx.
Hmm.
It's kind of just the way I have the network set up.
Yeah, I mean, what's that letter there? AE.
Pronunciation. I think it probably depends on the language.
Ah. Traffic. Okay, that's weird.
Yeah. The problem is that then you can't distinguish between regular traffic and
Yes, nobody knows whether you're
talking about network traffic or the thing traffic.
playing City Skylines or something.